As a constitutional law attorney, former senior legal advisor and personal counsel to President Donald J. Trump, Jenna Ellis believes in the rule of law and the importance of integrity in our elections. And she's ready to tackle the big cultural and legal issues facing America. This is the Jenna Ellis Show. Here is your host, Jenna Ellis.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Jenna Ellis Show. I'm Jenna Ellis, and CPAC happened over the weekend. I was there, a lot of our favorites among conservative leaders, including my good friend from Daily Wire, Michael Knowles. He gave an excellent speech about the truth of transgenderism, which of course means that transgenderism as an ideology is a complete lie. And Michael Knowles had some very, very important things to say about transgenderism, and I want you to pay very close attention to this clip of what he actually said. Listen to this.
The clearest example of this is the battle over transgenderism. On the one side of the debate, you've got the liberals who argue that third graders should be taught to change their sex in schools. On the other side of the debate, you've got the conservatives who say that we should wait until fourth grade. Doesn't seem like much of a difference to me. The problem with transgenderism is not that it's inappropriate for children under the age of 9. The problem with transgenderism is that it isn't true. The problem with transgenderism is that it puts forward a delusional vision of human nature that denies the reality and importance of sexual difference and complementarity. The problem with transgenderism is that its acceptance at any level necessarily entails the complete destruction of women's bathrooms, women's sports, all of the specific rights and spaces that women currently enjoy. There can be no middle way in dealing with transgenderism. It is all or nothing. If transgenderism is true, if men really can become women, then it's true for everybody of all ages. If transgenderism is false, as it is, if men really can't become women, as they cannot, then it's false for everybody too. And if it's false, then we should not indulge it, especially since that indulgence requires taking away the rights and customs of so many people. If it is false, then for the good of society, and especially for the good of the poor people who have fallen prey to this confusion, transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely. The whole preposterous ideology at every level.
So, of course, the plain meaning of that clip and what Michael Knowles actually said is that the ideology itself needs to be eradicated, similarly to how the pro-life leaders have always suggested and have always advocated that we need to make abortion not just illegal, but unthinkable, because abortion is not healthcare. That is a lie. That is a myth. Human beings made in the image of God have personhood, inherent dignity and worth, and all rights that attach from the moment of conception. Anything else is arbitrary and a lie. The same goes for the myth of transgenderism. Transgenderism is an ideology that must be eradicated so that no one is participating in it or even thinks that there is a realistic possibility in the truth of reality that men can become women or women can become men. But of course, the mainstream media wants intentionally to pervert this narrative and to suggest that Michael Knowles is advocating for literally Hitler. They're suggesting that what he meant by the term eradicated means that literally the conservative movement wants to go and eradicate transgender persons. That is not accurate. We know that that's not what Michael Knowles said because we all just heard what he plainly said. Every person, even if they have gender dysphoria, they are confused about their gender or their sex, is still a person. A human being made in the image of God has inherent dignity and worth. That doesn't mean that we need to participate in their mental illness that suggests that a biological man can become a biological woman. But mainstream media doesn't want to talk about that. They don't want to have the conversation about transgenderism on the merits. So what do? They intentionally mislead They intentionally pervert the plain meaning of what Michael Knowles said, and they want to create a fake debate around it. My good friend James Lindsay, who all of you should be following on Twitter, social media, anywhere else that you can, said this: the goal is not to grasp it, or what Michael Knowles was actually saying. The goal is not to grasp it. The goal is to take advantage of opportunities to advance a dialectical mass line, usually by intentionally misinterpreting, in order to drive a fake debate that enables a narrative push to move a target audience in a desired direction. Michael said something that can easily be misconstrued in a productive way. So that's exactly what happened. The debate around it is the tool by which some other agenda is achieved. I agree with James. The other agenda, of course, is to push this whole narrative that men can become women and women can become men. So coming up right after this, we're going to talk to Michael Knowles and how Daily Wire is taking on the mainstream media's lies and their defamation in their headlines and what Michael Knowles is going to do about it. Legacy Precious Metals is the company that I trust to give you good and patient counsel for investing in your retirement. The Biden administration has caused a financial crisis, and they have no clue how to fix it. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and when oil prices go up, not only do your expenses go up, but the cost of transportation and shipping spikes, leading the prices of goods to rise. And we are already seeing record inflation. That's the last thing that we need. Our economy is in trouble, and you need to take steps to protect yourself. If all your money is tied up in stocks, bonds, and traditional markets, you may be vulnerable. So gold is one of the very best ways to protect your retirement. No matter what happens, you own your own gold. It's real, it's physical, and it's always been valuable since the dawn of time. Call Legacy Precious Metals today at 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com, where you can download the free investor's guide. You can also go to my Facebook page, Jenna Ellis. I am a public figure on Facebook, and I just posted yesterday a really great interview with the president of Legacy Precious Metals, who is discussing why you need to start your retirement account even if you're in your 20s or 30s. There is always a great time to protect your retirement and invest, just like you want to protect your health over the long term. So go to Legacy Precious Metals at legacypminvestments.com or call 866-528-1903. Joining me now is Michael Knowles from the Daily Wire. And Michael, so there's been a lot of controversy, of course, of saying that, transgenderism should be eradicated. So let's clarify for the record. Are you the new literal Hitler?
I was going to say, Jenna, it's very courageous of you to bring on a genocidal maniac such as myself. I had no idea. Of all the things I've been called in politics, I have to say genocidal is a new one. The libs have outdone themselves. But no. And so there have been a number of headlines in Rolling Stone, in the Huffington Post, in the Daily Beast, in the Independent, so some international headlines as well, which defamed me. The headlines said that I called for transgender people or the transgender community to be eradicated, which is libel. And look, I don't know anything about the law, but some very serious constitutional scholars and lawyers, people like Mike Lee, Senator Mike Lee, who is a constitutional lawyer and Supreme Court litigator, Vivek Ramaswamy, another friend of mine, presidential candidate, Yale Law School graduate, have pointed out this would seem to be actionable libel by these news organizations. And what happened is then a lot of people believed the fake news, and so they might be forgiven for believing a false headline. The news editors, I don't think they really ought to be let off the hook for this, because I think they're acting with actual malice. And if you look at the words of my speech, even the clip that was going around, I don't think it is really possible for these news editors, ignorant as they may be, illiterate as though they may be, I don't think they could have really seriously misinterpreted what I said. Because what I said was, for the good of society, and especially for the good of the people who have fallen prey to this confusion, transgenderism must be eradicated from public life. The whole ideology, top to bottom, at every single level. And so an ism generally refers to a doctrine or a set of beliefs or a system of thought. In some cases, you might use the suffix ism to refer to a malady of some kind. In any case, though, if you say you want to get rid of a belief, that doesn't mean you want to
murder all of the people who hold that belief. If I say I want to eradicate capitalism or I want to eradicate communism, I'm not saying I want to slaughter every communist in the world. If you say you want to eradicate some malady, I want to eradicate anorexia, I want to eradicate poverty, you're not saying I'm going to kill all the poor people. I mean, and lest there were any confusion, the fact that in my speech I explicitly say I want to help the people who are suffering with this, and then at the end I explicitly say that I'm talking about an ideology, I think that these newspapers, it's not just that they got it wrong. I think they were actively lying about me, and that opens them up to a serious conversation about libel.
As it should. And as a constitutional law attorney myself, I would agree with my colleagues in this area of the law as well, that this is actual malice. And it's obvious because no reasonable person could objectively listen to what you said and arrive at the conclusion that they put in their headlines. It was intentionally misleading. It was intentionally false. It was intentionally defamatory. And that is still the standard under New York Times versus Sullivan. And I think you're right to go after these news organizations that are intentionally trying to create a narrative around what you're saying and look for ways that they can proof text. They can take a word or phrase like eradicate transgenderism, take that out of context, out of your phrasing, and then make it mean whatever they want it to mean. They're trying to, on purpose, construct their own reality, and they're doing that in a way that is intentionally false and misleading, which as publishers, they are prohibited from doing that. I mean, it's amazing, Michael, that in this society and in the protections of the First Amendment for freedom of the press and freedom of speech, there is so much that you as the press can do. But the one thing you can't is make an intentionally false statement that is knowingly false and pervert the plain meaning of words. But what does this tell you then? That the left has to go to such lengths in order to try to drive home this false narrative instead of actually substantively debate what it is that you are saying?
Well, this is why the left-wing papers had to lie about me if they wanted to maintain their current ideological agenda. Because the point of my speech, all the rest of the speech that I gave at CPAC, was that unfortunately what happens is that the conservatives very often cave on the left's agenda. So the left will propose some crazy idea, the conservatives will briefly oppose it, the liberals will stand firm, and conservatives cave, and then they just move on and they say, okay, that crazy idea is fine, but this new crazy idea, that's terrible. And so that's how we got from, in the 70s, bra-burning feminists say a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. The conservatives oppose this for a brief period of time. Eventually, they cave on that kind of feminism, and they move on and they say, okay, but we oppose the sexual revolution and all the village people stuff. I don't know, all the kind of eccentric sexual behaviors. And then what happens? In short order, the conservatives cave on that, and they say, okay, but redefining marriage, that would be crazy. Then what happens? The conservatives cave on that. They say, okay, transgenderism's crazy. Then what happens? The conservatives cave on that. They say, okay, well, transing the kids, that's our line. Or now it's transing the 8-year-olds. The 9-year-olds, it's fine, but the 8-year-olds, it's not fine. And so you see where this ends up. And I think the reason that these newspapers were so angry with me is because they believed that they had already won on transgenderism. They believed that the conservatives now accepted the transgender false anthropology, that a man can be a woman and a woman can be a man. They believed that we had essentially caved on allowing grown men who consider themselves to be women to go into women's bathrooms, take women's positions, go into women's locker rooms, and all the rest. And that now we were only arguing over the margins of should it be 8-year-olds or 9-year-olds. And the fact that my speech said, no, we need to reject transgenderism whole cloth. It's either true for everybody or it's false for everybody. It happens to be false for everybody. And so we should help the people who are deluded into thinking that it's real. I think that's what set them off. And they overreacted, and they know that they overreacted because when I pointed out, I said, these headlines are false. I never said this. This is defamatory. They instantly changed those headlines. I think they probably got a call from their legal department saying, hey, editorial, you're getting a little big for your britches here. We're going to get sued into oblivion if you don't change this. So very quickly you saw the Daily Beast caved, the Rolling Stone caved, Huffington Post, I believe, has since caved, the Independent in the UK, on and on and on. Now, there remains libelous content in those articles. So we're looking at that right now. But the fact that they changed those headlines so quickly, I think, is an admission of guilt in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. But they're stealth editing, I'm sure, and not actually apologizing. I mean, the same thing happened to me, interestingly, on this same show when in the aftermath of the Club Q shooting. And unfortunately, there were fatalities, and mass shootings are never okay. And I discussed the context of that with a pastor actually on this show. And we talked about how mass shootings and intentional murder is always wrong, regardless of who it is, made all of the obvious statements of morality, and then discuss the fact of, well, what happens in the afterlife, for these people who went to that club that night, who had no idea that they weren't going to come home. And in the context of Christian truth, and in the truth of every person has to answer for themselves, where are we going after we die? We talked about that. But of course, the Huffington Post and others had the headlines that claimed that I said that every LGBT person will, quote unquote, burn in hell, which I never said. Those headlines, of course, came out because they thought, like you said, that we've already caved as Christians and we have fully embraced and accepted the morality and the choice. And you can be a gay Christian and totally fine with us. So they were shocked that I was suggesting that maybe no, homosexuality is still and always has been immoral, but they stealth edited some of those headlines, but never walked it back, never got an apology, never had, anything else happen on it. But I think you're absolutely right. These are the types of mainstream media outlets that are always acting in bad faith because they don't want to have this conversation on the merits in the same way that they don't want to have the conversation about the morality and the government's obligation to regulate abortion in the wake of the Dobbs decision. We've never had a conversation on the merits about abortion because they've always knee-jerk said it's a constitutional right. It's super precedent. And they don't want to have the conversations. So how can we still have these conversations in a meaningful way when all they're trying to do is push a dialectic that will misinterpret intentionally the words that we're saying so that we have an argument over what we actually said, not the substance of what it was that we actually said?
You have to lean into it, okay? The only way out is through, and I know that you know this as well. If the press are not going after you, it means you're probably not quite over the target. When they start attacking you and calling you all sorts of mean names, that's when you know you're getting closer. And then when they're outright lying about you, that's when you know that you are hovering right over the target. And so we need to stay right there. There was one headline that was half true about this whole controversy. The headline said, Michael Knowles, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but the gist of it was, Michael Knowles calls to eradicate transgender people at CPAC to thunderous applause. And so it's half true. I obviously never said anything about eradicating people, but there was thunderous applause. I'm pleased to say, I'm not trying to brag here, but the speech was very well received. And it's not because I did such a wonderful job on the performance. All I did was state a basic truth, which is that men can't become women and women can't become men. And we all know that, even if we're now being forced in some cases to pretend that that is not the case. And so it's a reminder to people that your best plan of action is to stick to the truth. You might be persecuted for saying the truth in various moments in history. Obviously, the things didn't work out all that well for Socrates or, anybody else afterward who said the truth. But ultimately, the truth wins. And on the flip side of that, if you're trying to chase the passing fashions of the day, you might get accolades in the moment, but in the long run, you're going to look very foolish. It's not I who said it. It may have been, I don't know, call it Niebuhr or somebody, some theological thinker at some point who said that if you marry yourself to the spirit of the age, you will find yourself a widow in the next. Let's say it was Dean Inge or Fulton Sheen. I don't know. It was one of those guys. Whoever said it, doesn't matter who said it because the statement remains true. And I think there are a lot of squishes right now who are trying to marry themselves to the spirit of the age. They're going to look very foolish. Whereas the people who point out that men can't become women, women can't become men. If you live your life according to lies, you're not going to flourish in the long run. Those people will be vindicated. In fact, I think they're vindicated today.
And I hope that you were vindicated. And it's amazing some of the precedent, though, that we are seeing in the judicial system on the transgender movement. There was a case from USA Powerlifting as an organization that will now allow transgender athletes to compete in the women's division. And so when you talk about pretending, Michael, and talk about the self-evident truth of biological reality, it made me so mad that a court this week ruled that USA Powerlifting, and this is their actual opinion from the court, they said that USA Powerlifting was, quote, making a person pretend to be something different than they were, and that USA Powerlifting had violated the Minnesota Human Rights Act. This is the exact opposite of what transgenderism actually is. Men are pretending to be women in order to enter women's biological sports. And yet we now have a judicial opinion from a Minnesota court saying that requiring a person to be the biological gender that they are in order to participate in women's sports, you have to have the right chromosomes and you have to actually physically, literally be a woman, that somehow you're forcing then men to pretend to be something that they aren't, which is men. This is absurd. Where do we go as a conservative movement when we have such insane activists on the court?
Well, this proves the point. The fact that you're seeing these kinds of court decisions proves exactly the point that I was articulating at CPAC, which is there's no middle ground when it comes to transgenderism, because transgenderism puts forward an anthropology, a false anthropology, but a false view of human nature, which is that men and women are not really different and complementary, but really they can be indistinguishable. They can move one to the other. And if we're going to accept that as a society, then it's got to be either true for everybody or false for everybody. This is why it is a fool's errand to try to stop at transing the kids, but saying that adults can transgender themselves. That doesn't make any sense. If an adult can properly identify as transgender, why is that? He's saying that he's a man who was born in a woman's body or vice versa. Well, if that sort of thing can happen, then how did that happen? Presumably he was born this way. That's what the activists tell us. And if the man is really born this way, or the woman, I guess, whichever, then not only should we permit the transing of the kids, we affirmatively should trans the kids. If that's their true identity, then we should affirm their true identity from the earliest age possible. Now, of course, it's all complete nonsense. But if it's nonsense for the kid, then it's nonsense for the adult as well. And so there's this really nasty, pernicious lie at the heart of this ideology, this broader political movement, which is that the truth is cruel and lies will set you free. The truth of a man who wants to be a woman being a man, that's very cruel, and the lie that he's secretly a woman will set him free. Well, that's a complete inversion of the gospel truth, that lies are the tool of the prince of this world to deceive us and ruin our lives, and that the truth, in fact, will set you free. And so we should put the truth above all things.
We should. And, this also raises a very interesting tension point, I think, in terms of how we approach this as a society in what we permit in society and what we prohibit. Because so often the more libertarian minded, and I'm using that as a very broad term, and I recognize that for the people who always write in and say, well, I'm a reasonable libertarian. I understand. But in the general broad perspective of those who would say, well, I don't care what you do in the privacy of your own home as long as you are an adult. Well, this is no longer the privacy of their own home. This is not something that we can just take a hands-off approach and say the government can never prohibit a consenting adult from participating in an activity that is immoral or socially prohibited. We do that all the time in various ways that we legislate, and that is legislating morality. And we have accepted that since the founding of this country. And yet we are also not only on that side saying we are drawing the boundary lines and saying, well, whatever you do, 18 and above, fine. We're only concerned about minor children. But I think we're also opening up the door to an argument that transgenderism and wokeism as an ideology can and should potentially have the same protections constitutionally under a free exercise of religion argument. Because if we are making the assertions that this is a religion in terms of a belief system, well, we know that it is fundamentally false and not true. But I can see future litigation when you have courts like in Minnesota suggesting you can't make a man pretend to be that he is a man. Then go the step further and say not only is this type of ideology and fundamentally false, pernicious behavior protected under a civil rights argument, but also under a First Amendment free exercise argument as well.
Well, the problem is that I agree that the leftist view, the woke view, especially the transgender view, has all the trappings of religion. The problem is that it's irreligion. Religion has a meaning. Religion is a habit of virtue that renders to God what God deserves. That's what it is. And so, in this case, it would be quite the opposite. This is why it's very silly when the atheists claim that they have religious protections. Irreligious people cannot have religious protections. This isn't some novel, authoritarian, far-right view of mine. Actually, this is the view of John Locke. This is the view of John Milton. I mean, John Locke is the father of liberalism. This was the view of many of the people who built our country. And to say that irreligious people have religious protections would totally undermine religious protections. Though it would be more honest, at least, if the leftists stopped pretending that their views were scientific or a matter of course and common sense, and said, no, we have this bizarro worldview of the human person wherein the soul and the body are totally separate, dualist, at odds with one another, and your true self has nothing to do with your body. It has everything to do with your immaterial soul. I mean, that's what they're saying when it comes to transgenderism. And what you're focusing on, Jenna, it was a really important point on being in one's own bedroom and not being interested in what one does in one's own bedroom. It's why I chose my words so carefully for CPAC. I said that the transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely, which is a much broader position than the conservatives have articulated in quite some time. But it's not totalizing. I mean, there is still the private chambers of one's own mind. I'm not suggesting that we send the thought police out, put a gun to your head and make you believe something that you don't believe. But for public life, when we're talking about going into bathrooms, presenting yourself on a passport, on a birth certificate, in the way that even one comports oneself, that one identifies. Well, if it's public, then we, the people, have some say over how that's going to be. And the vast majority of Americans understand that men and women are different and men can't become women. So why is it the case that our entire public life, our whole politics, our political order in an allegedly self-governing society is being dictated by a handful of radicals who are completely wrong on human nature?
That's a great question. And this is where conservatives need to take a more firm stand. And we should have taken the firm stand 20, 30 years ago. And even way back during the sexual revolution when, Griswold versus Connecticut at its very inception said that and stood for the premise that the Supreme Court can read into the Constitution whatever it wants, and this whole vast penumbra of ideas, and then simply legislate from the bench accordingly. I mean, we've gotten ourselves into such a mess that now the leftists would try to parse all of these details and use them against us and say that just because we have some protections for religion, for example, and free exercise, that the irreligious can benefit from those same protections in the same way that the absurd Bostock decision stood for the premise that discrimination on the basis of sex somehow in 1964 included sexual orientation and gender identity, and that protections of biological sex extend to what you believe about yourself in the confines of your mind. I mean, this has become so absurd. And so just in the last few minutes that I have here with you, Michael Knowles, and I really appreciate you coming on and informing us that you're not literally Hitler. I'm very pleased to discover that today.
I was pleased to discover it about myself. I said, good.
Yes,
okay,
and
right.
Thank you for clarifying that so that, people can still watch this show in good faith.
It's been very tricky ever since the liberal media informed me that I am a genocidal dictator. I can't tell what my genocidal name should be. Am I Slobodan Milosevic? Am I Benito Mussolini? Am I Maukel? There's so many options, and Rolling Stone hasn't picked one yet.
Well, we will look forward to you updating your Twitter handle accordingly when you settle on which genocidal maniac dictator you would like to be. But in the interim, where do you see the conservative movement headed when we have a wide tent Republican Party that from the very top has people that are doing what I'm calling moral gerrymandering? They're trying to move the bright lines of empirical, self-evident truth to simply create their own version of reality and carve out their particular sin that they prefer, so that we move all of these moral bright lines to arbitrarily determine based on who we don't want to offend. That's not conservatism, and that's certainly not a good blueprint for the future of jurisprudence.
I'm all for a big tent party. The problem is the delineation of where the tent sits, because the people who endlessly blabber about a big tent party, they're often in New York and Los Angeles and San Francisco and Washington, D.C., and they want to expand the tent by embracing all the most absurd and eccentric liberal pathologies and movements. And they think that, by embracing now, I don't know, polyamorous polycules with furries and billy goats, that's really going to expand the Republican Party's electoral reach. What about the people in East Palestine, Ohio? What about the blue-collar workers whose jobs were shipped overseas? Because all the big tent party people, they never seem to talk about them. And I think that they have a far greater claim on our focus. And I think that they're a far larger demographic. If you actually want to expand the party, how about you start talking about the American worker? How about you start talking about the overlooked American in that flyover country, the deplorable, irredeemable, bitter, clinging American? I think there are more of them. I think they are more deserving of our attention. I think they've been far more overlooked. Yeah, let's expand the party into America.
Yeah, so well said. And keep up the good work. And, your reception to thunderous applause at CPAC in the heart of the party, people are still rational and reasonable, and we should not, as conservatives, ever yield an inch to the radical, false ideologies of the progressive left that would seek to compel us to participate in their lives. So I am grateful to you for standing up with courage and speaking out how you do. And I hope that Daily Wire will file these types of lawsuits and win, because we do need to have more wins. And I, frankly, am not yet tired of winning. So thanks so much, Michael.
Me neither, Jenna. Thanks so much. Great to be with you.
Thanks. Legacy Precious Metals is the company that I trust to give you good and patient counsel for investing in your retirement. The Biden administration has caused a financial crisis, and they have no clue how to fix it. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and when oil prices go up, not only do your expenses go up, but the cost of transportation and shipping spikes, leading the prices of goods to rise. And we are already seeing record inflation. That's the last thing that we need. Our economy is in trouble, and you need to take steps to protect yourself. If all your money is tied up in stocks, bonds, and traditional markets, you may be vulnerable. So gold is one of the very best ways to protect your retirement. No matter what happens, you own your own gold. It's real, it's physical, and it's always been valuable since the dawn of time. Call Legacy Precious Metals today at 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com, where you can download the free investor's guide. You can also go to my Facebook page, Jenna Ellis. I am a public figure on Facebook. You need to start your retirement account even if you're in your 20s or 30s. There is always a great time to protect your retirement and invest, just like you want to protect your health over the long term. So go to Legacy Precious Metals at legacypminvestments.com or call 866-528-1903. Have you ever picked up a towel set because it felt so soft in the store, but then when you leave and you go to use it, it's not really that absorbent? It's basically a towel that is leaving you out to dry. That's why MyPillow has developed the MyPillow towels that actually work. I know, it's totally mind-blowing. Towels that actually dry you. Their 6-piece towel set includes 2 bath towels, 2 hand towels, and 2 washcloths. They come in a variety of colors. I have the sage green and the white. I love them. And right now you can receive a 6-piece set for only $39.98 with promo code Jenna. That's JENNA. So go to mypillow.com right now and click on the radio listeners special. MyPillow products come with a 10-year warranty and have a 60-day money-back guarantee. So to receive this amazing offer on the 6-piece towel set of MyPillow towels, just go to mypillow.com, click on the radio listener special, and enter promo code Jenna, that's JENNA, or call 1-800-564-8475. That's mypillow.com, promo code Jenna.